Welcome to Covenants and Kingdoms, where we provide biblical teaching in a historical context. We're starting today's episode with the Enuma Elish, an epic creation myth from ancient Mesopotamia. This is a cosmic showdown between Babylonian gods like Marduk and Tiamat, battling over chaos and crafting the world from the ashes of their own struggle. But here's where it gets interesting. The Enuma Elish has threads that weave right into the Bible, including the creation story in Genesis, Isaiah 14, and the mashal, or taunt, of the king of Babylon, and the Genesis 11 account of the Tower of Babel. In this episode, we'll unpack this ancient narrative and reveal how it connects to the biblical account in ways that might surprise you. So stick around as we dive into the Enuma Elish and uncover what it tells us about the roots of Scripture. Welcome to Covenants and Kingdoms.
When on high, there was chaos. Out of this chaos, the waters were divided into fresh water known as Apsu, and the greater salty water Tiamat. The union of these two entities gave birth to the younger gods. Lahmu and Lahammu, Anshar and Kishar were created. From Anshar came Anu, and from Anu came Enki and Enlil. These young gods, however, were extremely loud, troubling the sleep of Apsu at night, and distracting him from his work by day. Upon the advice of his assistant Mumu, Apsu decides to annihilate the younger gods. Tiamat, hearing of their plan, warns her eldest son, Enki, and he puts Apsu to sleep by reciting an incantation and kills him. From Apsu's remains, Enki wears Apsu's crown. He imprisons Mumu and creates a home with his wife, Damkina. Out of Apsu's heart, Marduk is born, and Damkina declares his splendor. My son, the great sun. Anu then creates the heavens. Tiamat, once the protector of the young gods, now is enraged that they have killed Apsu. She consults with another god, Kingu, who advises her to start a war and destroy the younger gods. Tiamat rewards Kingu with the tablets of destiny, which legitimize the rule of a god, and then he controls the fates. He wears the tablets proudly as his breastplate. With Kingu as her champion and her new consort, Tiamat summons the forces of chaos and creates 11 chimeric monsters to destroy her children. Enki hears of Tiamat and Kingu's plans and seeks counsel from his grandfather Anshar. Anshar advises Enki to appease Tiamat, and Enki attempts to do so. He and the other gods, however, are too weak and in their futility are turned away from among them, and at the declaration of Anshar emerges the champion Marduk, who boldly swears that he will defeat Tiamat if he is declared the supreme god. Anshar consults with the other gods and tells them of Tiamat's plans and proposes that Marduk be declared their champion and supreme god when he prevails. They apparently agree over drinking. They become intoxicated and give approval of Marduk as the supreme god. Marduk is given a throne, a scepter, and weapons for his battle. He challenges Tiamat and engages in battle with her. As they fight, Marduk defeats Kingu, shoots an arrow through Tiamat's heart, and kills her. He then defeats the other gods who are aligned with Tiamat, destroys their weapons, and captures them. He imprisons the 11 monsters at his feet as trophies of war, much to the adulation of the other gods, and then places their images in his new home. He then splits Tiamat in two. From her eyes flow the waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Out of Tiamat's corpse, Marduk creates the heavens and the earth. He appoints gods to various duties, including appointing Anu, the ruler of the heavens, along with Enlil and Enki. Then he chains Kingu and takes the tablets of destiny, legitimizing his own reign as the supreme god. After the gods have finished praising him for his great victory and the art of his creation, Marduk consults with the god Enki, the god of wisdom, and decides to create human beings from the remains of whichever of the gods encouraged Tiamat to make war, Kingi. Kingi is charged as guilty and sacrificed, and from his blood Enki creates Lulu, the first man, to be a helper to the gods in their eternal task of maintaining order and keeping chaos at bay. As the poem phrases it, Enki created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free, thus enslaving humans to the service of the gods. Following this, Marduk arranged the organization of the netherworld and distributed to the gods their appointed stations. The poem ends in Tablet 7 with the long praise of Marduk for all his accomplishments. Marduk divides the gods into above and below, 300 in the heavens, 600 on earth. The gods then proposed to build a throne or shrine for him. Marduk told them to construct Babylon. The gods then spent a year making bricks, they built the Esagila, the temple to Marduk, to a great height, making it a place for Marduk, Enki, and Enlil. On the seventh tablet, all the names of Marduk were written.
Man, what a wild story.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Very. Well, welcome to Covenants and Kingdoms.
Welcome. We're glad to be here with you.
My name is Brad.
I'm Nathan. Nice to see you.
And we are here to talk about biblical history in a historical context.
Yeah, there wasn't anything from the Bible in that first
Absolutely
story.
nothing. There may have been some parts that sounded familiar to some folks.
Yeah.
Also, if you're a reader of all things Middle Earth, there are some things that are similar there.
They really are.
Anyway, but what are we doing here?
What are we doing?
Why are we here?
Why are we here? That's a great question. The eternal question.
That is the eternal question. Well, we are here to discuss biblical history and historical context, like we just said. I am the Vice President of Operations, Brad Haynes, and Nathan.
I'm the president of Baba Java Coffee.
Yeah, and we are actually sponsored by Baba Java Coffee. And happy to be here. If you're looking for great specialty coffee delivered to your home, we can do that for you. Check out our link in the podcast notes. There is even a discount code for any listener of this podcast to get 10% off your order. So hit that up. You'll enjoy it. If you're interested in more information about specialty coffee and what that is, you can check out our other podcast, Coffee U. We talk about everything from planting coffee to harvesting it to roasting it, drinking it, and even setting up your own coffee business. So it's a great place to find everything you need to know about coffee. And it's not just us talking. We have guests and things too. So.
Yeah, thankfully it's not just us, unless you want to be bored to death.
People that are smarter than us, we bring them on too. So.
Well, that's pretty much everybody, isn't it?
Yeah. But we're happy to be here. So again, why are we talking about this, Nathan? What does this story specifically have to do in the great history of redemption?
When we're talking about the Bible,
right,
we have to talk about it in context. And the context is not just exegesis. Okay, it is exegesis. We want to read the passages. We want to read what they say, not just what they say in relation to the chapters, the books around them, which we do. We want to do that. We don't want to just break them down verse by verse. We want to look at the languages. Obviously, that's part of good exegesis, is going back to the original languages. We want to look at the original context. We want to look at the historical context, which we're going to talk a lot about in this podcast. We want to talk about what the people are thinking and the literature they use, and that's why we talked about that Enuma Elish story. That story is called the Enuma Elish. The first line says, "When on high." That's what Enuma Elish means. And so we want to use the historical context, the literature, the societal context, all those things to bring what the Lord is trying to say to us in these passages to life.
You're probably going to get into this. I know you will, but just quickly, where's the story from?
We're starting at Genesis 11. Okay, so that doesn't mean we're discounting and not talking about Genesis 1 through 10. No, absolutely not. We're going to talk. We're going to refer back to a lot of them. Even today, we're going to refer back to some of it. But Genesis 11 is the first chapter of the Bible where we actually have history. Okay, so Mesopotamian history. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. So when we read that Babylon story, he said that from Tiamat's eyes came the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's very important in the ancient Mesopotamian cultures. There's lots of different cultures that kind of merge together. It started with Sumerian and some of those things. That's where we have history.
Now let's read Genesis 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and they had bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. And Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor. And Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishcah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
So now we've set up the biblical history part, what's taking place around the time of Abram, really since the Tower of Babel up until Abram. So what's going on in the rest of the world? There's a major event that happens that causes a lot of chaos. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. So the Ice Age happened about 12 to 11,000 years ago. One of the original times where we see global climate change. All right. So 12 to 11,000 years ago is about 10 to 9,000 BC or so. So what happened is the whole geography of the earth changed because of the ending of the Ice Age. All right. So the ice melted and it forced people to go into different places. And so when that happened, one of the places they settled was in this area of Mesopotamia, okay? So they had to settle, so they were hunter-gatherers, right? So at this time they were hunter-gatherers. They chased where the food went. So they would pick food or they would hunt food, all right? And then at some point, at about 8,000 to 6,000 BC, people started settling down into small villages. And when they did that, they did that because they became agrarian. When they became agrarian, they needed to be near rivers and streams to, water their crops and things like that, water their crops. And they even started with animals, okay? So they started watering their crops, watering their animals, and then they had to have food for their animals too. So they started their agrarian culture, settled near rivers and lakes and water, and so they started settling down. And then eventually this place called Sumer was settled. This is the very southern part of what's called Mesopotamia. Again, we said Mesopotamia means between the rivers. It's Greek for between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers.
So in modern political boundaries, where would that be?
So it's mostly Iraq.
Gotcha.
Yeah, mostly Iraq. To the north would be like Syria. To the east would be Iran. To the west would be Jordan. To the south would be the Arabian Peninsula. Okay. So they started for the first time having food surpluses because of their agriculture. They developed new technologies. They started specializing in professions like kings, priests, artisans, people that made pots, which are artisans.
Yes, that's true.
People that farmed just the crops, people that farmed animals, people that had to make clothing from the like sheep and goat skins and things like that. So all these different professions emerged, okay? Writing was invented, called cuneiform. The first writing in this area was called cuneiform, and it looks like chicken scratch. It's like they took these little reeds with a kind of a triangle in, and they made different shapes in different directions with these little waves into clay, soft clay. All right. So there's not trees. They didn't have a lot of paper and things like that. So the thing they wrote on at first were clay tablets. They would impress these little reeds into the soft clay, and then it would harden. And it's actually really good they did this. So listen, paper, wood, things like that, they decompose. So if they had written in paper and stuff like that, we wouldn't have any record of any of the stuff that they had left, or very little. Because it was on clay tablets, it lasted until today. So we can read and see what their culture was like, even as far back as thousands and thousands of years ago. So thank you for having clay tablets and writing on clay tablets.
So you're saying someone had to major in read language study.
Yes, people specialize in all of these languages.
I mean, it's pretty wild because, of course, there's no one living who speaks these languages.
Right. So, Sumerian. So this was called ancient Sumerian, and there's no modern language that's the equivalent of it.
Yeah.
Okay. It kind of merged into some of the other languages, and mostly Semitic languages at the time.
Gotcha.
So we'll talk about that a little bit. So about 3500 BC, we started having these urbanized centers. So cities, these first cities, Eridu, Uruk, and some of the things that are some of the major ones that we've studied and talked about. There are lots of archaeological discoveries of there. And again, we can see exactly kind of what their culture was like because they left clay stuff. They had pots, they had clay tablets, they wrote stuff on. It was crazy. So wealth and culture started. Uruk, we excavated those, and we found there were royal tombs, there was gold, there was treasure, there was instruments, and even servants that were buried with the dead kings. They needed all these things for the world of the dead, and we'll talk about what that means in just a little bit. Technology spread, ideas spread, religious views spread. So they had these religious views, and we'll talk a lot about that today and in the next episode. Part of that Enuma Elish story was part of in Babylon, which is a little bit later, some of their religious views, okay? So the Akkadians came to power, all right? There's this famous first emperor of the world named Sargon, and Sargon conquered Sumer about 2340 BC. His capital was called Akkad. And maybe close to Baghdad right now. We've never found Agade.
It's only written.
We've never found Agade. It was written, but there's a lot written about it. So we really believe it was a real place, but nobody's ever found it. So hopefully we will one day. So Sargon was the first emperor, the first empire builder. And so the legend of him is written in several places. There's even an autobiography of Sargon. So Sargon's legend may sound a little familiar, and we'll talk about that later in later episodes. Sargon's mother was a high priestess, and she conceived him in secret. Fearing the consequences, she placed him in a reed basket sealed with tar. They called it an ark, which she then set adrift in the Euphrates River. Sounds familiar.
Very familiar, yes.
The river carried the basket to Aki, a water drawer, who found and raised Sargon as his own son. Sargon, now a young man, rose through the ranks, becoming a trusted advisor to the king of Kish, Ur-Zababa. The legend's purpose was portraying Sargon as a self-made man, and it helped to legitimize his rule among the common people, rather than relying on a divine claim to the throne. So what normally happened was the kings either said they were divine, descended from divinity, from God, from the gods, or they were replaced, or they were appointed by the gods to rule. But Sargon was different. He was a self-made man, and he tried to appeal to the common people. So Sargon's empire extended from the north, from the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to the south, which is what we call the Persian Gulf today. The legend says that after he conquered all these lands, that he washed his sword in the sea. And he says, Sargon himself claims that he conquered up to 50 kings and kingdoms in his conquest. Sargon claims. Sargon, here's an example text of his autobiography. Sargon, strong king of Akkad am I. My mother was a high priestess. My father I do not know. My mother, a high priestess, conceived me. In secret, she bore me. Sargon ruled about 54 to 56 years. So what happened is he forced the people to tear down the walls of the cities. And that did two things. One is it prevented rebellions, all right? So his forces could go in and put down any rebellions easily. That was probably his main purpose. But the second thing that it did was it promoted trade. It promoted commerce. So commerce really increased throughout the whole empire, and then from the empire to the ends of the earth, the known earth, as far as Egypt and as far as India to the east. They traded in grain, timber, tin, precious metals, precious stones, and his wealth increased. He had, of course, sons and then grandsons that ruled after him. But then after about 100 years, the Gutians conquered Akkad. And when the Gutians conquered Akkad, it became a mini Dark Age. They didn't write a lot. The Gutians didn't write a lot. So that's what Dark Age means. It means we don't have a lot of material, archaeological writing material that we can find out a lot about them at the time. So when we say Dark Ages, we don't mean like, oh, it's just, they don't have anything, they don't do trade, nothing happens. No, we just don't know a lot about it. That's what it means. So about 2000 BC, wars and the environment changed. The old cities and city-states were eclipsed by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Several dynasties vied for power, and some of the most powerful were Babylon, Mari, Ashur, Lhasa, and Essene. Most of these were Amorite dynasties, okay? And the Amorites are Semitic nomads that came from the west, okay? The word Amorite comes from Martu, which means these guys came from the west.
Very clever.
Yes, very clever.
Just for those who are listening and may not have a lot of the history background, when you're saying Semitic, you mean descended from Shem.
Descended from Shem that we just read about in Genesis 11. Yeah. That's exactly right. So at some point, so we believe that the historical accounts of the Bible are true, right?
Yes.
Not everybody believes that, but we believe that.
And there's archaeology that backs a lot.
Yeah, a lot of it up. But every culture in the world has a flood story. It's really weird. The interesting thing is a lot of the religions in the world are similar. The religions, the way they worship, a lot of their mythologies, they're really similar. And so we believe that at some point there was a lot of shared information. Mm-hmm. Even the way they practice, and we'll talk about this when we get into Genesis 11, that ziggurat, that tower that they constructed, it was a form of worship, a temple structure that was shared throughout the whole world. The Egyptians had the pyramids, the Mayans, the Incans,
you see it in Eastern religions too.
They had these pyramidal type structures, which they used as places of worship, temples.
Correct.
So we were talking about the Amorite dynasties, okay? It started with this king called Sumu Abum, and established in Babylon around 1894 BCE, making the beginning of the Old Babylonian period and the city's rise as a significant power in Mesopotamia. So these nomadic Amorites were from Western Mesopotamia, and they played a key role in eclipsing the third dynasty of Ur. Okay, and then they established Babylon and some of these other cities as major powers in Mesopotamia. So Sumu Abum took control of Babylon in 1894 BC, or close to it, and started this Amorite dynasty in the Old Babylonian period. So again, these Amorites were Semitic peoples. They were Semitic nomads. Does that sound familiar?
Very.
Who does that sound like?
Sounds like Abraham and his.
It sounds like Abram, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And his family, right?
Yeah.
Under Semuabum and his successors, Babylon expanded its influence, though initially its control was limited to the surrounding area. It eventually gave rise to Hammurabi. We've all heard of Hammurabi,
Yes.
right? 1792 to 1750 was his reign. He unified much of Mesopotamia, established a centralized government, and is known for the Code of Hammurabi. The reason Hammurabi is so important, he was an emperor that did those things, but he's got a big stele in the Louvre, right? So everybody that's gone to the Louvre has seen the stele of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi. Okay, so before Hammurabi's code, there were earlier collections of laws, all right, including the Code of Enuma in about 2100 to 2050 BC, and the Code of Lipit Ishtar, which show a tradition of written law in Mesopotamia. So let's look at these guys' name, right? Again, to show the influence of who they were or of the gods that they worshipped. Okay, so Namu, where do you think he's from? His name is Namu.
He's from
Okay, but he called himself the king of Kish. Okay, because Kish was a major city that had religious significance. So a lot of people use the title king of Kish, even if they weren't from Kish, or even if they didn't even have control of Kish. Okay, but Namu was from right? Part of the third dynasty. And then the Code of Lipit Ishtar, which, what does that sound like?
Well, it sounds like Ishtar.
Yeah. so yes. So he must have been promoted to king by Ishtar. Mm-hmm. The Code of Namu is the oldest surviving law code. That's the oldest one we know that we have a record of, dating back to the 21st century, about 2100 to 2050, like what we said. And then we finally get to Hammurabi. So the Code of Hammurabi is important today because it's the first most comprehensive list of codified law codes that we have. Okay, it has principles like an eye for an eye, which we see that even in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Okay, and
Old Testament law.
Yep, it has the presumption of innocence, and it's influenced legal systems and concepts of justice from that time on. So in these codified laws, we see the king pronouncing that they have achieved justice. Okay, so they claim from these codes and these laws that these kings, by the grace of the gods, have achieved justice. That's important.
Interesting.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay, so we have great background of different kingdoms and kings and codified laws that have been set up that gives us a good history into what's going on in the world. What about religious history? What are these? How are these different cultures viewing the world and creation and those things?
Yeah, so we need to understand two things: the religions and the cosmology. All right, let's talk about the cosmology right now, because this is where Abram comes from, and this is where all of the ancient Near Eastern peoples get their ideas from. Okay, again. So they all had the same ideas. So when the Bible was written in that time, when it was passed along, all the histories and the stories of the Bible were passed on from generation to generation. Remember, at this time, they didn't, Abram, as he was migrating from place to place, he wasn't stopping to write down everything. Right? He didn't have his little notebook and he was just writing stuff down, right?
Of course.
So these people were a lot better about passing along information than we are.
And memorizing it.
And memorizing information, right?
Yeah.
So they would memorize so much and then they would pass it on. That's how at night, when the sun goes down, what are you going to do? I mean, they don't have anything to do, so they tell stories. They pass along these information. They propagate these stories. And that's how it was passed along, okay? So they all had these common ideas and they had all these stories. And Abram passed along the things that he was given, passed along the things that he experienced to those other people, Isaac and Jacob.
And it had been passed along to him
and it had
previously.
been passed along to him previously by his family. And we'll talk about that too. So in the cosmology, all right, here's what they thought of how the universe as they knew it was organized.
And there should be an image on the screen. Matt's going to pop up there so you can see what we're describing. And if you're listening, the link to this graphic will be in the show notes as well. So you can go take a look.
So the earth was like a disc. It was like this flat disc. It was the things that we can experience, okay? So we had this earth. Underneath the earth, this will sound familiar, there was this place called Apsu, okay? So this Apsu is the same God that we talked about before, right?
Yeah,
it's the name
correct.
of the same
in
God.
the story.
In the Enuma Elish story, right? So it's like this great abyss underneath the earth, right? So in the Bible, it'll be called the abyss. It'll be called, and Peter calls it Tartarus, which is the Roman term for it. Underneath Apsu and underneath the earth is called in Sumerian it was called Urkala, the netherworld. Okay, so Urkala. So in Hebrew it's called Sheol. So we'll see that all throughout the Bible. We'll see that a lot. Sheol. Okay. So how does the earth connect to the heavens? So they have these different levels of heavens. They believed in 3 levels. Eventually it led to 7 levels of heaven. Mm-hmm. Okay. But in general, the top most was where the high gods lived. Okay. The older gods, the ones that were the strongest. All right. And then the younger gods lived in the second level of heavens. And then the third gods were where stars, the constellations and the stars were, and these were controlled by lesser gods. Okay? So in the Bible, we'll see over and over again that these angelic beings are called stars. Okay? They're sometimes called sons of God, sometimes they're called stars, but stars are referred to as, or are thought of as controlled by these angelic beings. Now, we know they're balls of gas, right?
Correct.
But the ancients didn't know that. They had no concept of these balls of gas that emitted light and emitted photons for, hundreds of thousands of light years. Mm-hmm. They had no concept of that, right? We do. They didn't. So they were pre-scientific. The mountains were considered pillars that held up the dome of heaven, okay? So when we're talking about mountains, the mountains are really super significant. We're going to go into the Bible and explain how the writers of the Bible thought about these mountains also. So the mountains are the place where heaven and earth meet. So the mountains at the top is where the gods would descend and interact with man. Okay? So the worship of gods happened on mountains. All right? And there's different ways we can see that. From the ziggurats, like the Tower of Babel, are man-made mountains, the pyramids, these different pyramidal type worship structures that we see around the world. It's because they built these to interact with the gods, to be a place of worship for the gods. Also, the high places we see in the Bible are places that take place, are altars that people built on these mountains. Okay? They're the high places. Okay? So we'll see that throughout the Bible too as we study it.
And like we said, these ziggurat structures were used as high places for worship as well.
They were. So these were considered, these mountains were considered gates to heavens. The bottom of mountains are caves, right? We find caves in places. So those are considered to be gates to the underworld, okay? In Sumerian, they thought there were 7 gates to Urkala. And so through these cave structures, you could find these gates to Urkala, all right? That's how people descended into the underworld. Surrounding all this was in Sumerian called Namu, which was like this primordial sea. So the universe was this primordial sea, all right? And all this was contained in the universe as they knew it. That
makes sense.
That's silly to us. It doesn't make any sense to us. We have satellites that go around the earth. Mm-hmm. Okay? Does that mean that people that believe the Bible is true believe in a flat earth?
Well, unfortunately, some do, but no, most rational thinking people would say no.
Why in the world would God not just come and tell these people and write, if he's inspiring the truth through Scripture, why would he not just come and say, you know what, that's not how it really is. I made the earth as a sphere, okay, and it's in space, and these stars are not angels or controlled by angels. They're really just balls of gas, and they emit photons to help you have light. And these photons have basically existed since they started, right? They just keep going back and forth everywhere. And so there's this air. The air is not part of the heavens. It's just gases. It's gases so that you can breathe, right?
Right.
Why do you not say that?
Well, that's a great question.
Because they would think it's ridiculous, because of course the earth is a flat disk. And of course there's a dome of heaven. And of course there's this underworld called Erkala or Sheol. Of course there's Apsu. It would be like somebody coming in. Now, some people would believe this, but it would be like somebody coming and telling us, like the Matrix, this is all your reality isn't real. It's all AI generated.
It's all simulation.
It's a simulation. Okay. If somebody came and offered you the blue or the red pill, which one would you take? Would you take the red pill, and you would see the truth? It would be like somebody trying to do that with us, right?
Yeah. All right. So we have this Sumerian cosmology, how the world is made, but also how we interact with it. So how does that kind of link to how we view spiritual things, and especially in our Western culture? Because like you said, we think that's crazy.
We think it's crazy.
But in some ways, we shouldn't think it's crazy. As followers of Jesus, and we believe the Bible is true, and we believe there's a spiritual world, we shouldn't think spiritual things are crazy.
Well,
correct?
There's two ways. One, these are pre-scientific people, okay?
Of course.
They completely believe in these cosmological entities, okay? Mm-hmm. Is that the way the universe is really created? No, but they're pre-scientific. Of course. We can't put our scientific discoveries that we've made over thousands and thousands of years on them and think they're ridiculous for thinking that. Because what did they invent? These ancient peoples. They invented our number systems. They invented our years. They invented seconds and time. You
said they invented laws. I mean, they
invented laws. Yeah. They invented how to organize people. They invented politics. Mm-hmm. They invented the wheel. They invented the way we still do agriculture today. They invented all that. They discovered all that, how to do all those things. But we just think they're stupid. They just invented these gods, right? Yeah. They invented these gods to help them to be able to see the world around them in a more organized way, okay? To make sense of the things that are happening, right? We discount the fact that there are real spiritual things going on here, all right? We can't do that, all right? Our culture is Western, modern culture. Yeah. And we see through a materialistic lens, all right? And materialism, I don't mean materialism like not consumerism. I mean materialism like the things that we can test and with see our senses, all right? Correct, yeah. The material things, all right? So science. So when I was doing my seminary work, I came across this article called "The Flaw of the Excluded Middle" by Paul Hibert. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what Hibert is saying, what happens in the article is Hibert was born and raised in India, but born and raised to American parents, right? And so his culture is Western, materialistic. He went back. He went back to the U.S., did university, became a pastor, and then went back to India. And when he's back in India, he encounters this problem. So there is a small village, and there's an outbreak of smallpox in the village, okay? And so there are people that believe in traditional religious beliefs in this village, okay, that there are spiritual entities in this world, and then there are Christians in this village, okay? So Hibert's Christian, so he's trying to help the Christians, right? So the Christians come to Hibert and they say, we have this outbreak of smallpox. The villagers want to sacrifice to the gods so that the gods will stop this outbreak of smallpox. But it's a poor village, so they don't have an ox to sacrifice. But they want us all to contribute to buying an ox so we can sacrifice it. What do we do? Well, Hibert's like, well, he goes back to what Paul says. I mean, we shouldn't sacrifice to demons, and we're not going to contribute to that. So you shouldn't contribute. So what happens? The villagers go back and they say, no, we're Christian. We believe in Jesus. Jesus is going to save us. And then one of the Christian daughters gets sick with smallpox. They go back to hibernate. What do we do? Just trust. Believe that Jesus will heal her. Okay? So they get ostracized in the village. So in the meantime, they're not able to do trade. None of the other villagers, which are the majority, vast majority, would do any business or have anything to do with these Christians. They buy the ox without them. They sacrifice to the gods, and then the Christian girl, dies. What does it all mean? Are there really these entities, these spiritual entities in the world? Well, what Hybert's point is that we as Westerners need to think of things differently than people that follow Jesus and believe the Bible is true and believe that we should practice the things in the Bible. What we need to do is look at things in a different way. Okay? And what different way? Well, he kind of organizes it, and it's messy. It's not exactly like this, but there's basically two things. People that believe the Bible believe in high gods. All right? We believe Yahweh is God. And Yahweh is the God over the universe, and he exists in this, again, when we were talking about cosmology, this high place, okay? He's in heaven, and he exists in that place. We're on earth, and on earth, we believe in materialism as Westerners, right? So we don't think of spiritual things that happen around us. And Hybert's point is that there are spiritual things happening on the earth, okay? We believe in a high God, and we believe in materialism, but in the earth, and the things that happen and influence things that happen on the earth are spiritual entities that influence things too. Now, should we be animistic in that we believe and are afraid of every demon around every bush?
Similar to these villagers.
Right? They're more animistic, and they think there's demons and gods that are out to get them, and so they're afraid of everything. No, we shouldn't be like that. But should we be open to the idea that there are other spiritual things happening in the world? Now, in the United States, it's hard to see. In the United States and the Western world, it's ridiculous to us. I mean, and we've experienced some of these things when we were in other cultures.
Yeah, exactly.
So Brad and his family lived in another culture. My family lived in the Middle East for several years. You want to share some of your experiences?
So we lived in Muslim country, 99.9% Islam. Also very monotheistic, very, I would say, liturgical in their religion. They believe in only one deity. But the place where we lived, they also were very spiritual. They lived in the middle as well. And I remember early on when we were there, our kids would be playing outside, and it would get close to sundown, and we noticed our kids would come inside, and we asked, why are y'all inside? They said, well, everybody went inside. So we kind of started, we actually asked some friends of ours there, when it gets close to sundown, nobody's outside, especially the kids. And he said, it's because we believe that if your kids are outside around sundown, that the jinn will come and take your child away. It's possible, it's not always going to happen, but they're afraid that a jinn will come and take their child. And so that was the first time I was hit with that's weird, number one, because I had my Western materialistic mindset. I was like, well, that's dumb. Why would you believe in that? But I should have said, well, I would be very afraid of that too, if I believed in that.
Yeah.
But then go into the power of Jesus over those spirits. And I believe that if I have faith in Jesus, he defeats those spirits, and he has power over them. They don't have power over me. He has power over them. And so it gives a better testimony also to the power of Jesus than to just say, well, that doesn't exist.
Right.
You're just discrediting. It's basically calling them morons, or,
calling them,
you're just making fun of them essentially. And it's going to put a wall up immediately.
Right.
With any type of relationship. So, but that was like really early on in our time there. And it really shaped how we interacted with the people there.
I had some similar experiences. We lived in the Middle East in a Muslim context also, and so I had some. There are some. I really experienced some spiritual entities, and some of those I'm not going to share about on this podcast. But there's two kind of lighter ones that I will share with you, and these are Christians. These are people that follow Jesus. Okay, So I had a friend. And my friend in Jordan, he was about 6'3", 6'4", about 250. He was like
He was a big boy.
bodybuilder. He was a really big guy, but a teddy bear at the same time. But anyway, so we would hang out. We would study the Bible together. We would talk about spiritual things. And then one night, we were at this place, and there was this park nearby that we would go to sometimes. But at night, he would not go to the park. He refused to even drive near the park because he was scared of the jinn. I said, Tony, why are we not going to this park? And he said, because the jinn are there. I'm afraid of them. We don't want to go there. So this is a believer in Jesus that believes that there's these spirits in this park, and we don't want to go there. All right, second one. So another friend of mine lived in this city called Kerak. Kerak is a really historically significant city. In the Bible, it's one of the main cities of Moab. So we'll talk about that when we get there. Kerak was a Crusader city. There's a really big Crusader castle there, which is really cool. And the thing that's the best to me is that has the best jamid in Kerak. The best jamid in the world is from Kerak. Okay,
that is a
jamid is a yogurt
dish.
is a yogurt that is a key ingredient in this dish called mansaf. Mansaf is
It's very tasty.
It's so good. Oh, I love it so much. And the best jamid comes from Kerak, right? All right. Anyway, my friend's from Kerak. His family lives there. He's from a Christian background, so his family's Catholic, and they believe there's gold buried all throughout Kerak. From it's a very historical city, so there's been lots of different peoples there. So he told me the story one time of that his neighbor was trying to find the gold in his house. He thought there was gold buried. So he was digging for the gold, and a jinn was protecting the gold and cut his hands off while he was digging.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I was really confused by that. Again, my Western thinking, my materialistic thinking didn't make any sense.
Right.
So I said, well, okay, do you have gold in your house? And he's like, yes, we have gold in our yard, but I will never dig because I want my hands. He said, I need my hands.
That makes sense. I'd be scared too.
These are Christians. Yeah. These are people who believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
So spiritual things are believed by most of the world. These spiritual entities are believed by most of the world. And they're also believed by these ancient peoples, okay, that there were spiritual things. They experienced these things. It's not just because they made it up to make sense of the world around them. They experienced some of these things. Brad, we've both been talking about jinn. What is a jinn? People may not know what that is.
Right. Well, jinn have actually been around as far as their belief even before Islam. Pre-Islamic religions believed in jinn. Really, they're just spiritual entities. And if you've ever seen a Looney Tunes cartoon, when you have the angel on your one shoulder and the devil on the other one, that's where they get it from. So in Islam especially, they believe that the good jinn sits on your right shoulder and the bad one on your left, and they are recording each your good and bad deeds. But even more than that, they believe that there are also jinn that we can't see, and some are good, some are bad, and very animistic versions of Islam. They always try to appease them some way. And
they believe really weird things about them in some cases.
Exactly.
The word genie comes from jinn.
It does.
Like if you like Aladdin, the genie.
It literally means
jinn.
My jinn is what it means.
Yep.
So my spirit. But it is very interesting to think through some of those things. And one thing I really enjoyed about this article is Hybrid talks about how Christians who only think in the two dynamics of the high God and the materialistic world have been, he quote, a secularizing force around the world. And I'm going to quote just a small section from the article. He says, because the Western world no longer provides explanations for questions in the middle level, it is not surprising that many Western missionaries have no answer within their Christian worldview. Given no answer, they, meaning the people that they're working with, the villagers, for example, they return to the magician who gave them definite answers, for these are the problems that loom large in their everyday life. So, like he was saying, they came to him instead of us going and saying, oh, we believe in the power of Jesus over this, we will pray and hope that he will heal this person. No, they didn't do that. He just dismissed their claims and said, no, we shouldn't partake in anything they're doing instead of interacting with them. They actually got the result they wanted from the shaman and didn't get the result from the Christian. And so therefore they're going to go back to him because they're getting the result. So we just need to think through that. Like you said, when we're communicating with people who live in the middle, think through how you're going to communicate with them and how you're going to show the power of Jesus to them.
Hybert's conclusion in his article, I'm going to quote this again. In a new way, I began to realize the true answers to prayer are those that bring the greatest glory to God, not those that satisfy my immediate desires. It's all too easy to make Christianity a new magic in which we as gods can make God do our bidding.
Yeah, friends who've worked in India, especially, this is a problem they have that I've heard them speak about many times, is Jesus just becomes one of many gods that they worship instead of him being the only God they worship. And I know that's hard in polytheistic areas, but it makes us need to show the power of Jesus even more over these spiritual entities.
So let's go back to Genesis 11 and we'll tie all these things that we're talking about together. So in Genesis 11, we see that the earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now, Shinar is not a Sumerian or a Semitic word. It's actually, some people think it's Egyptian. So it shows that kind of gives more strength to the argument that Moses helped to, is the author of the Torah. Yeah. Right? So anyway, is it Egyptian? We don't know. But this area of the Middle East, Mesopotamia, southern Mesopotamia, is called Shinar. Okay, that's what they're referring to. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they made brick for stone. Do you remember when we talked about the Enuma Elish story? Marduk instructed the gods to make brick, okay, to make this city and this shrine to Marduk. Okay,
exactly.
What were they making? We'll see. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, bitumen, what is that? Bitumen is an oil-based product, right?
Right.
So petroleum-based, right? Back in the ancient days, obviously they didn't need oil for gasoline and petrol and plastics and things like that. They needed it for mortar and for tar. Okay, so they waterproof stuff and they put stuck stuff together. That's how they used it. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower." That Hebrew word's migdal, tower, migdal. So it's kind of the same word that means like large, tall. Okay, so if I'm going to McDonald's and I'm ordering a large drink, so they have small, medium, large, and giant, anak. So the large is gadol. So it's the same root as migdal. Okay, migdal means tower, means tall, a tall place. All right. Come, let us build ourselves a city in the migdal with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Now, let's stop there for a minute and talk about why this is bad. I mean, obviously, in the coming verses, we're going to see that that's bad. Well, why does it matter? Why
does God care about people building a building?
Why does he care about two things? One, them building this tall mountain, this tall man-made mountain with its tops to the heavens. And two, why does he care about them being gathered together? Let's talk about the gather together part first. So in Genesis 1:26 through 27, God made men, and in verse 28, he says, "And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the heaven, and every animal that moves on the earth." So when God created all things, he said it was very good. Tov meod is what the Hebrew says. It's tov meod. He doesn't say tam. He doesn't say perfect. He says tov meod, very good. So his plan was for people to take this garden, the perfection of the garden and the relationship of God, and do what with it? What was his plan?
Spread it around the world.
He to multiply be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the earth. That's what his plan was, to make what happens at Eden happen on the whole earth.
Wait, hold up. So you're saying that Eden wasn't the earth, that Eden was just a part of the earth.
I mean, that's what Genesis says. It gives specific geographical parameters of where Eden was.
So a lot of us don't think about that.
Right. It wasn't the whole earth.
It's not something we discuss typically.
No,
which is
it's not.
interesting.
But we don't
But
think
it makes
about
sense
it.
when you think
But the
about
Bible is specific about where
It is
Eden
very
is.
exactly.
And it also mentions, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, why they were making mountains. Again, we got to remember their cosmology. They were making mountains because Eden was on a mountain and it had a garden in it. So throughout history, kings have made monuments to themselves as man-made mountains, monuments to the gods as man-made mountains, and they put gardens all around them. And especially in the Middle East, that's really super significant. As we get into some of the historical things, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, that Nebuchadnezzar had built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon because his queen that was from Media was used to being in the mountains with gardens. And in Babylon, there were no gardens. So he created a man-made garden for her.
So go back to what we were talking about. In the Tower of Babel story, God was concerned that people were coming together. But back in Genesis 1, he gave the command to spread around the earth.
He wanted us to spread throughout the earth, not to be gathered together.
Exactly.
Now, in the Enuma Elish story, what do we learn? What did Marduk want to happen? He said, we created man. Enki creates Lulu, the first man, to be a helper to the gods in their eternal task of maintaining order and keeping chaos at bay. The poem phrases it, Enki created man on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free from their labor. So why did the gods create men? To serve the gods, to be slaves of the gods. Okay? So they created men to be slaves of the gods, to do the gods' work, so the gods didn't have to work. Okay? So according to their beliefs, that's why men were created. Why did God say men were created? We just read in Genesis that he wanted us to fill the earth and subdue it, to bring the perfection of what he created with the relationship with God to the ends of the earth. He wanted us to create Eden in the whole earth.
Because we had perfect relationship with him.
We had perfect relationship with him. The original plan for the man when he was created was to tend the garden in Genesis 2. And then when he gets a partner, we read the creation of the partner in Genesis 2, Eve. And then we go back in Genesis 1, just puts them together. He created man and female. He says to both of them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule over its creatures. He doesn't say, serve me, be my slave.
Right.
Come together. I want all the people together so that I can, remember in the Enuma Elish, it said, so they can control them and they could use them as servants of the gods, right?
But God's plan was not that.
The Lord's plan was the opposite of that.
Exactly.
So in Babylon, the people had gathered together in one place. Why? So they could be controlled. Controlled by the king, controlled by the gods, whoever it may be. The king believed that he was divinely appointed. And this king may have been Nimrod. The tradition says that this king that established this tower was Nimrod, right? There's no historical evidence of that, but we have found archaeological evidence that there's a ziggurat in the place where we believe is Babylon, and so historical.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
It makes sense. So in the Enuma Elish story, what did Marduk command the gods to build? He commanded them to build a tower to glorify him, right?
Correct.
So why is the Tower of Babel created? What does Genesis 11 say? Well, it says it was to make a name for ourselves, okay? So making a name for who? Well, it could be talking about the gods, but it could be talking about men too.
People, yeah.
We know that kings traditionally have built monuments to themselves to glorify themselves, okay? And
it still
the Lord,
happens today.
it still does, and it's ridiculous. Who does the Lord want glorified?
Himself.
Him alone, because he deserves it, right?
He's very jealous of that, as
And
he
so-
should be.
But why the mountain? Why did they make these man-made mountains? Remember, we said that in their cosmology, the mountains were kind of the pillars that held up the heavens, and the tops of the mountains to make a tower that with its top in the heaven, like it says in Genesis 11, was where the gods can interact with people.
Right.
Okay, so
That's where the gods dwelt.
That's where the gods dwelt, was on top of the mountain. So we have this idea of as in heaven. So remember in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, "As in heaven, so on earth." And so we have this idea of as in heaven, so on earth, and we see lots of different themes in the passage, in the scripture passages that will indicate the same thing. One of them is like these places called mountains. Okay, so we think of Eden as a garden, right? Everybody knows that it's called the Garden of Eden, right? But it's also a mountain. It's on a mountain, all right? And the Bible's pretty clear about that. So the people of Mesopotamia, they believed in this unseen spiritual world that were in the divine abodes of the gods, the places where they live for meeting people, for governing the affairs of the human world, were portrayed as a garden on a mountain. Okay, so in the ancient Near East was an agrarian culture, right? So most people just try to live day by day, week by week, month by month, right? But the few who weren't that way were mostly the kings and the priests. And those are the ones that had been elevated to their status, put in place, anointed or ordained by the gods. Okay? Some of the kings claim to be gods themselves, right? We see that throughout the writings. Okay? Surely the God lived in a place where there's lots of water, like gardens, where there's lots of vegetation, there was plenty of fruit, plenty of stuff to eat, where there were just abundance, right? And surely the gods lived in a place where there were no humans. So where are the places in the world where there are no humans?
The mountains.
The mountains. That's where they were. So we got a little bit more understanding when we discovered Ugarit. Ugarit is a city kind of in Syria now, which is just to the north of where modern day political Israel would be. And Ugaritic is a language that we found that is really close to Hebrew, okay, to ancient Hebrew. Right? It's like probably the closest language. So when we talked about when we started studying Ugaritic and discovering the writings, the religious writings indicated that they had a god named El, and El, his right-hand man was called Baal, Zebul Baal. Okay, does that sound familiar? Have we seen him anywhere else?
Yeah, many times.
Many times in the Bible, right?
I mean, he's mentioned by the Pharisees, who thinks that Jesus is working with Beelzebul,
the arch enemy of Yahweh in Israel's existence, mostly. Okay, they worship lots of other gods.
Yeah, they did.
But in the time of the king, time of those historical writings, that was the one that was mentioned the most. Okay,
yeah,
and we'll talk about that a lot later. Okay, but anyway, Baal's abode where he ruled was a mountain. He ruled on a mountain. He was the one that came riding on clouds. Okay, he was called the cloud rider. For those of you who think we're equating Yahweh with El and Baal, they are markedly different in their interaction with humans and markedly different in the way that they rule and their moral and ethical qualities. Yahweh is far and above them. He is holy compared to them. So we're not equating them. We're just saying these Middle Eastern peoples, these ancient peoples had these same cosmological ideas. Okay, the place where this mountain was of Baal is called Tsapanu, which is the remote heights of the north. Okay, Tsapanu in Ugaritic means north. All right. So in the Bible, we see that some of these descriptions are the same descriptions that we see for Yahweh. Yahweh is at the top. Okay, he has lesser beings, spiritual beings that he rules over. And then there's even these lesser spiritual beings called Malachim who are the messengers, the ones that come on the earth, okay? Just like the Ugaritic. The tabernacle, one of the main ways we see as in heaven, so on earth, is the tabernacle, all right? In Hebrews 8, we see that he says that the tabernacle is a shadow and a copy of the temple in heaven, the tabernacle. He calls it the tabernacle in heaven.
But those two words are kind of interchangeable.
So the original was tabernacle. In Revelation, we've been studying Revelation in our small group for a long time. And so we just, we read over and over and over again, this loud voice comes from the temple. Mm-hmm. Okay. So evidently in this high heaven, wherever Yahweh, his throne is, where these other spiritual beings, which we see throughout the Old Testament, we see them in Isaiah 6, we see them throughout Revelation. And that's the irony. Christians, Western Christians, they'll read Revelation and they'll read Isaiah and they believe, again, in the
Psalm
high,
82 as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Psalm 82. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. In the high spiritual beings. So in heaven, there are all these spiritual beings, but they don't talk about, even though over and over and over and over again in the Bible, we see spiritual beings on the earth. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about those things. Okay.
Very little. You might say, oh, well, demons exist, but we never really flesh out what that means.
And we believe that they happened, but we don't live or practice like we believe that they're a reality, which they still are.
Definitely.
Okay. In Psalm 48, 1-2, Jerusalem is said to be located in the heights of the north, Saphon. Okay. Mount Zion is the mountain assembly, again, located in the heights of the north in Isaiah 14:13. At Sinai, Moses and others saw the seated God of Israel, Yahweh, under whose feet was a pavement like sapphire tile work and like the very heaven for clearness. That's Exodus 24:9. The Garden of Eden, of course, is a lush, well-watered habitation. Genesis 2, 5-14. Ezekiel 28:13 mentions the Garden of Eden, the Garden of God, but then adds the description that the Garden of God is God's holy mountain. Ezekiel 28:14. We naturally think of God's mountain as Mount Sinai or Mount Sion. That's Mount Zion. When it comes to garden imagery, the latter is spoken of in Edenic terms. Like Eden, Mount Zion is also described as a watery habitation in Isaiah 33, in Ezekiel 47, Zechariah 14, and Joel 3. Whether Sinai or Zion, the mountain of God is in effect his temple. Okay, that was a quote from Michael Heiser, Garden Unseen Realm. Okay, in chapter 6. So, what does all this mean?
Good question.
Mountains are where? What happens? What happens in mountains?
Well, we talked about that's where gods lived, according to ancient cultures. It's where humans interact with deities. If they wanted to, if they could get there, that is. And it's where the Garden of Eden was.
It's where the garden was, okay? It's where the gods are, all right? So let's read Isaiah 14.
Let's do it.
This is a passage that I want us to really focus on, okay? So this ties really, really strongly the intention, I think, of what the people in Genesis 11 have in their hearts, okay? Mm-hmm. It's this idea, and it's ironic that it's the king of Babylon, which is being mocked here, okay?
Yep.
So Isaiah 14, and this section is a mashal, okay? The Hebrew mashal means to talk smack, all right? That's what it means, all right? They're talking trash to the king of Babylon. So let's go down to verse 9, and verse 9 says this: Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you. All who were leaders of the earth, it raises from their thrones all who are kings of the nations. And then let's move down to verse 13. You, whoever this is that Isaiah is talking about here, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. Remember, we said the stars in the cosmology were spiritual entities that were in charge of the stars. Okay, so it's a way of saying these spiritual entities, I will be above the stars of the God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly. Okay, Harmored. In the far reaches of the north, Safon, remember we just talked about that. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like Elyon,
The Most High.
the Most High. Okay?
So who is this?
Who is this guy? What happens to him? So what does he want to do? And again, this is a taunt, a mashal to the king of Babylon. Okay, so is this actually the king of Babylon? And the king of Babylon want to ascend above the stars of heaven? And
Well, I think verse 12 kind of gives us an idea of
all
who
right,
it might
tell
be.
me what you think.
Well, it says, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low.
And in Ezekiel 28 is the parallel passage that a lot of people think is related to this one. And Ezekiel 28 says, you were in the Garden of Eden, the garden of God, O guardian cherub. Okay, so this is a spiritual, it's talking about the king of Babylon, right?
It is.
But who is behind the power of the king of Babylon?
Thing that
It's this spiritual
some
entity,
sort of entity,
whoever this is, right? And so this spiritual entity wants to rise above the stars of God, those other spiritual entities. He wants to sit on this Har Mored, the Mount of Assembly, in the far reaches of the Tzafon. He will ascend the heights of the clouds. He will make himself like the Most High Elyon.
And I think that section there in verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, it gives us an indicator that he is actually speaking to a created spiritual being who is behind all this.
Whether this is specifically, some people identify this with the dragon from Revelation 12, right?
Yep. Which could be.
With the Nachash from Genesis 3. Is it the same spiritual entity? Maybe. If it's not the exact same person, it's like someone similar or someone who wants to do similar type things. Okay, so a lot of people identify this with the original Satan, the dragon, the Nachash, the serpent in Genesis 3. But no matter what, this entity, this spiritual entity, is behind the power of the king of Babylon.
Yeah.
And the king of Babylon, what was he doing in Genesis 11? Whoever this is. Building a tower, Migdal, with its heights to the heavens. It sounds similar to Isaiah 14, doesn't it?
Very similar. Yeah.
So the idea is it's not just, we're just going to build a great tower because we can. They're building a great tower because they want to ascend the Mount of Assembly. Their heart wants to be like the Most High, Elyon.
Yeah.
Okay? That's why it was abhorrent to the Lord. And what happens?
I mean, he says he's going to take him down to Sheol.
All right, so listen to this.
far reaches of the
He
pit.
says he's going to take, what does it say at the end? Verse 15. What happens?
But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert, and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home?
He's brought down to Sheol. Remember in the cosmology, Sheol is the underworld beneath the earth, okay? Beneath Apsu, okay? It's below the earth. In Genesis 11, verse 5. Remember, they just said, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, just like Isaiah 14. Let us make a name for ourselves, right? Lest we be dispersed over the whole earth. So God wanted them to be dispersed over the whole earth, but these people are saying, no, we want to gather together. Why? So they can be controlled by this king or this entity or whatever it is. Just like what we read about in the Enuma Elish, right? Verse 5, and the Lord, where did he come? He came down to see the city, right? And the tower. So he had to come down to see the tower. So no matter what these people were trying to do,
They would never make it.
they will never, ever, ever be like Elyon, the Most High.
Correct.
Because he had to descend to come down to them, right? And Yahweh said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Now, what is he talking about? Is he saying technology is going to make it so great, they're going to be able to accomplish everything, and they'll be able to reach me and overtake me?
Of course not.
No. What is he saying? There's no end to the evil.
To their rebellion, yeah.
And the rebellion that they will accomplish. Just like in Genesis 6. Remember, Genesis 6 was the reset.
Yeah.
It started the reset, okay?
Yeah.
Genesis 6 is when the flood story, this flood narrative begins, okay? And so when that happened, it was a reset. And guess what? It looks like history is repeating itself.
Shocking.
Come, let us go down there, confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yahweh dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, which is what he wanted them to do anyway, right? And they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel. In Hebrew, Babylon is called Bavel, okay? Bavel. So anywhere in Hebrew that we see Babylon, it's Bavel, okay? Because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there Yahweh dispersed them over the face of all the earth, which is what he wanted to do anyway, right?
Yep.
So remember when we were reading the Enuma Elish story, the gods wanted to enslave the people and control them in service to the gods, right?
So you're saying
So how does that tie into the Babel?
Yeah, I don't know.
What happens? What happens at this Tower of Babel? Okay, so this Tower of Babel is the story that ties in that Isaiah 14, the idea of the king of Babylon or whoever's behind him wanting to ascend to be like the Most High Elyon, wanted to ascend to Har Moed, the Mount of Assembly, right? So what happened? Well, in Deuteronomy 32, let's read verse 8 and 9, okay?
All right.
When the Most High, who's the Most High? Elyon, the one we just read about in Isaiah 14, gave to the nations their inheritance when he divided mankind. When did he divide mankind?
Bible.
That we just read about it in Genesis 11, right? He fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Okay?
Interesting.
So who are those sons of God? He fixed the borders of the people. So he wanted the people to spread over all the earth, right? So he divided the peoples and he set over them entities that were going to be basically in charge of them, the sons of God. These sons of God, all right, we believe we're going to tie that into Psalm 82 in just a minute. Verse 9, but this is key. Listen to this. And this is something we'll visit over and over and over again, these two verses. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, Israel, his allotted heritage. Okay, so from these nations, okay, these nations were together. The idea at Babel, right? They wanted to ascend to be like the Most High. God had to come down and stop it. He spread them over the earth, and he appointed these rulers over them, right? What happened with these rulers? Well, let's see. In Psalm 82, this is what happened with the rulers.
God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment.
In the midst of the Elohim. So God, Elohim, has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the Elohim, these are other spiritual entities. He holds judgment. So he's judging these entities. What happens?
So we're going to go into more of this in the next episode, but just spoiler, he doesn't mean angels here. So, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So in the next episode, we're going to go into this in detail, in great detail. Okay. And we're going to break it down.
So verse 2, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods,
Elohim,
sons of the Most High,
Elyon.
all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations.
So something happened. He appointed the nations, these rulers. Okay, he scattered the people. He appointed them rulers, and they did something wrong.
They did, yeah. They didn't do it.
How long will you judge unjustly? He appointed them as judges. Remember, judges in the Old Testament are the God's appointed representatives, like Moses, like Joshua, like through the book of Judges, all the way up to Samuel, to rule the people in a theocracy. That's what they were supposed to do, right? So these
God was their king. The judges were his servants, essentially, but they were there to help the people, and they'll also sometimes function as a prophet too. Correct?
That's right. Yeah. A lot of them. So anyway, he appointed these spiritual entities to judge the people of these nations. And what did they do? Well, they judged them unjustly. They showed partiality to the wicked. They did not give justice to the weak and the fatherless. They did not maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. They did not rescue the weak and the needy or deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Right?
Correct.
They were supposed to. He said, you are gods, Elohim, sons of Elyon. Nevertheless, like men. So are these men?
They're not men.
They're not men because it says like men. If they were men, he would say, like all the rest of the men, you will die.
Right.
But like men, you Elohim, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, Elohim, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. Now, listen. So what happened in Deuteronomy 32? It said, in verse 9, but the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. Okay? But in Psalm 82, in verse 8, it says, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Okay? So Jacob is his heritage, his people. But in Psalm 82, it says, eventually what's going to happen? You shall inherit all the nations.
All peoples.
All people. Yep. So the nations, Hagoyim. Okay? That's what it says, Hagoyim in Hebrew. So this, at the end of this chapter 11 in Genesis, this is the context from which Abram comes. Okay? He comes from Shem. All right, let's talk about this for just a second, and then we'll conclude and talk about where we're going next time. So he comes from Shem. Remember, it said Shem when we read this part about Shem. Shem was 100 when Arpachshad was born. Okay, and if you go down through all the generations, it said Terah was 70 when Abram was born. Now, I'm a numbers guy. You're a numbers guy. We like to do math. If you do the math, it said Shem lived to be 600 total years. But if we did the math, Shem was 390 when Abram was born. What are the implications of that? What does that mean?
Somewhere along the line, the worship of the one true God ceased to exist in Shem's line. That's what because we know that Abram's people were not followers of Elion. They were pagans. So what happened between what you said, he was 100 and then he was, so he would have been in the 290 years between Shem and Abram, what happened?
Shem would have been 390 when Abram was born, and he lived to be 600. So was Shem still alive?
Yes, he was.
He was still alive. So what was the legacy of Shem? So Noah, it said, was righteous, Tzaddik, righteous.
Yep.
And he called upon Hashem Yahweh, the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Noah called upon Hashem Yahweh, the name of the Lord, right?
Yeah.
He taught that to his sons.
Yeah.
But something happened.
Something happened
along the way.
We don't know what.
Shem was even alive when Abram was born.
Yeah.
So Shem could have told them, hey, my father Noah, he called upon Hashem Yahweh. He was tzaddik, according to the Lord. He was righteous, right? But something happened.
Yeah.
What happened was Babylon.
Yeah.
Babel. It was this idea from the fallen Elohim, the ones that are supposed to judge the nations justly, that they led the people astray. So remember in the Enuma Elish story, men were created to be slaves of the gods, to serve the gods, right? So they gathered them together to be slaves, okay? And then we have this Isaiah 14 of these spiritual entities behind the king of Babylon that wanted to ascend to the Har Moed, Mount of Assembly, to be like Elyon, the Most High, all right? Something happened with all these Shem, Ham, and Japheth, okay? And we're going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk about what are the implications of that. We're going to talk about why this idolatrous worship of other gods was so bad, and how the Lord, Yahweh's purpose was to do one thing, to show himself holy, separate from the rest of these gods, because he is.
Yes, he is.
So you may say, this is paganism. We're polytheistic. We believe in more than one God. No, we don't. We believe in Yahweh. There's no one equal to him. There's no one like Yahweh. We believe that. Let me read you this passage that how Paul explains it. And Paul explains it beautifully just in this letter to the Colossians. Colossians 1, starting in verse 13. He, talking about God, okay, theos is the word he uses, has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Okay? Verse 15. He, Jesus, okay, the second Yahweh, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So Jesus, in the Old Testament, and we'll talk about this a lot, is presented as the physical manifestation of Yahweh. We see a physical manifestation of Yahweh over and over and over again in the Old Testament. It's clear. And even Jewish people believed in the Second Temple period, and in their early teachings taught the theology of the second Yahweh, which is Yahweh physically manifesting himself to be able to interact with the people. Okay? Because remember, in Deuteronomy he said, no one can see my glory and live. If you see the glory of Yahweh, you'll die. So in order to be able to interact with people he wanted to have a relationship with, he had to manifest himself physically. He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, Theos, the firstborn of all creation. For by him, Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether, these are spiritual things he's talking about here, thrones, he's talking about the invisible things, the spiritual things, thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Okay? So what is he saying here? All these spiritual entities were created by whom?
Jesus.
By Jesus. Yeah. By Yahweh, the second Yahweh. Right? That's what Paul's saying here. That's what we believe. These spiritual entities are not gods that can ascend to Har Moed and be like Elyon. They can't be like Yahweh because they were created through him and for him. And he, Jesus, is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of Theos, God, was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross.
Amen. I love that section.
That's what we believe. Jesus, Yahweh, is the creator of all things. Everything is created by him and for him. He is preeminent over all things. And we're not polytheistic.
We're not.
We believe in one God. We believe in Jesus. Exactly. And we believe that Jesus himself came to the earth to make all things right. We just read it.
Exactly. Well, that's a great first episode.
Yeah.
A lot of information. Happy you guys could join us and come back to the next episode where we'll go deeper into these sons of God, what they mean.
We'll talk about more spiritual things in the second episode, and then we'll get deep into Scripture, and then we'll go back to the story of Abram and understand exactly where he's coming from.
Exactly.
Join our Patreon where you will get ad-free versions and early access to our main episodes, plus access to our Deeper Waters episodes, where we'll go into further detail on the topics discussed in our main episodes. We'll see you then.
All right, so come back next time on Covenants and Kingdoms. Everyone have a good day.